Hey, I want to take on a recent article that came out late last week, and it was in the New York Times. It was an opt-ad, and the name of it was, I don't want to mess it up, Smash the Wellness Industry. Why are so many smart women falling for its harmful pseudo-scientific claims? So this article went on basically to talk about how women focus on their external appearance and how they obsess about cellulite, their body composition, parts of their body that they dislike, and how they perpetuate dieting culture and the industry that creates. Then it goes on to talk about how programs like the Whole30, diets such as the ketogenic diet, and other anti-inflammatory successful approaches to regulate inflammatory conditions, autoimmune disease, hormone imbalance, infertility, and so much more are pseudoscience and how those diets perpetuate disordered eating. So I have an issue with that because I am a part of the wellness industry, right? And, when I'm looking at day-to-day interaction with clients, I'm using food as medicine as the primary intervention or treatment modality. And then I'm using, of course, nutraceuticals or nutritional supplements that are pharmaceutical grade to help to accelerate their results and outcomes or get them above water if they're dealing with a functional deficiency or have a metabolic impact that would hinder their ability to build or produce certain nutrients and so forth. But we're not going to get into that. What I want to get into is the concept that diet can create freedom. So usually when we hear the word diet, we think of restriction, and that is very true. And I used to joke when I was first a dietitian that, the first three letters of diet are D-I-E, and no one wants to feel like they're dying. No one wants to feel restricted. Everyone wants freedom. And at the end of the day, I think using that delivery concept of freedom is one of the most important drivers of why you may want to consider a therapeutic diet. In fact, a couple of weeks ago, I was working with a client with chronic inflammation. She has rheumatoid arthritis and psoriatic arthritis. And our mantra together was, I deserve to be pain-free. Very empowering, right? I deserve to be pain-free. And this woman shared with me a year and a half ago when she had done my virtual 12-week food as medicine ketosis program that for the first time in over a decade, she was able to kneel at church. And she shared how powerful that experience was, that she was able to be on her knees in a pew at church when for years she had to sit out and partially participate. In a way, that's freeing, right? And right now, that individual is struggling with consuming sweetened foods. We found out also genetics that she has celiac disease to compound things. And she's in a tough situation where she's in a spiral of the guilt, shame, consumption, right? And so using food as a temporary escape mechanism or to assert your personal freedom could actually be imprisoning you in your physical body. Think about that. I think that we often misperceive in human nature the impact of short-term gratification to delayed gratification, and that's often the struggle with the weight loss process. But I do agree that we don't have to obsess as a culture about cellulite. We can embrace health at every size, but I think it's ignorant to state that all foods fit. I think it's ignorant to state that food freedom or eating all foods and chemical shitstorms and processed products that drive imbalance in the body, drive toxicity, have endocrine disrupting compounds and distress our hormone function, have pro-inflammatory compounds, have industrialized fats that interfere with the cell membranes of our body, which interfere with all of our cellular communication. It's ignorant to state that that's freedom, that type of approach to freedom creates us all being victims in our bodies of feeling subpar, mediocre, and point blank shitty often, catapulting chronic illness and disease in our culture. So I just want to make it very clear that by removing inflammatory foods, by eating single ingredient foods, and likely by driving fat as your primary intake, that you are going to be on the path closest to freedom. You're going to learn what it feels like to walk without your knees aching. You're going to learn what it feels like to stand at line in a coffee shop and not ruminate about whether or not you should get the scone, because it's just not an option for you. You just write it off and you move on. That's mental freedom. If you want to break up with sugar and you want to free yourself from obsessing about foods, you have to empower and educate yourself about what a food is, what is a nourishing health supporting compound, and what is health depleting and deleterious or harmful. That's where freedom comes from. So I have an issue when we make these grand scheme statements stating that diets create restriction. If you can't tell, I'm quite passionate about it. So I just kind of posed to you guys as a challenge today, what if you were able to wrap your mind around a concept with food that was freeing? It was freeing in the sense that you felt confident in the food decisions that you were making for yourself and your family. You weren't over ruminating, you weren't second guessing. It is freeing in the sense that it reduces inflammation and helps you to feel better in your body, mobility, movement, capability, right? It was freeing in the sense that the diet you subscribe to actually supports the way your neurotransmitters function, enhance your cognitive function, ground and stabilize your mood. That's freedom, right? And it's freeing in the sense that you're able to optimize hormone and other metabolic pathways in your system. So by following something like my anti-anxiety diet or participating in my 12-week food as medicine program with using nutritional ketosis as a tool, I really think that that's a pathway to food freedom, because you're going to learn how to empower yourself with food as medicine. And I am first to admit that we don't want to subscribe and narrow our concept of one diet being an end-all be-all. And that's really where I always am using my mantra that, doctrine creates disconnect, right? Something that works perfect for you this week and maybe even for 3 months may not in 6 months, may not the next season, may not work for you if you have a shift with physiological demand, like maybe you start training for a marathon, or maybe you've taken on extra workload. You're going to have to listen to the feedback of your body and be resilient and be open to modifying and changing. So I'm not stating that you need rigidity that is stagnant, but I'm stating that you need rigidity to eating whole, real foods. And then you work to determine your metabolic flexibility for what creates the most optimal freedom in your body. That might include carb cycling. That might include constant state of nutritional ketosis. It might include just a straight up low glycemic fat-fueled diet. And any of those can fit. But what cannot fit is a standardized American diet of chemical shitstorm processed foods, which are imprisoning our children and ourselves as victims of disease. We can't feed people processed ingredients, refined sugars, dyed and artificial ingredients, which have been shown in numerous studies to drive ADHD, attention deficit disorder, concentration and focus issues, inflammatory conditions, and then expect willpower to override. We have to nourish and empower from the ground up, and we have to focus on food as medicine in that sense. So I'm sorry, Jessica Knoll of the New York Times opt-ad. I do not feel that there is pseudoscience when I'm working with a Crohn's or ulcerative colitis patient who is off of their Humira or Remicade and is not on a biologic, is at lower risk for cancer than they were when they were at that drug, is not going to have risk for infertility and the nutrient deficiencies and be imprisoned by that expensive drug for the next couple decades of their life. When I see clinical outcomes of reductions in CRP, reductions in fasting insulin, hemoglobin A1C, and so many other biomarkers of health with food as medicine, that type of restriction is the path to freedom.